Okay, so how long have you been brewing? Been brewing since 2008. Started on a Mr. Beer kit, like a lot of homebrewers do, from a kit my dad actually bought me, and brewed like crazy on that. Was living in California at the time, moved to Arizona. We didn't really have a homebrew club in California where I live, so joined the Arizona Society of Homebrewers, and they gave us, lots of talks about brewing and the processes, and I really decided I wanted to get into home brewing. So started on my kitchen stove, brewing a bag, and just had, learned the process down, and decided to, maybe take that up another level, and actually started investing in equipment and going through the process there and doing 5-gallon batches, and progressed up into, getting different systems out there and really learning the process down to the point where I wanted to start entering competitions. What type of equipment do you normally use? As I stated previously, I started with Mr. Beer kit. I did brew in the bag, which was basically 2-3 gallons on the stove. Progressed into a propane setup, like most people do, kind of a Mickey Mouse brewing setup. Did get a really nice brew pot though, 15-gallon pot. Living in Arizona, it gets pretty hot though, so during the summer we don't see a lot of brewing, and that becomes a little bit difficult when there's a lot of brew competitions that come up. And not only that, I'm thirsty, so I want to drink, and so I was at one of the National Homebrewer Conferences, or HomebrewCon, and they had a system called a grandfather, which was an all-electric system, and so that allowed me to brew inside, especially during the summer. So that's my bigger system, my 5-gallon system that complements my BEERMKR, and I, so I'll brew that inside the house, started in the summer, and pretty much any time now, because it just makes it convenient and easy to do that. I have a keezer out in my garage that I use for kegging, and as well as a fermentation fridge that I'll use I use Spidell fermenters, or I've used carboys in the past too as well. So just, I've done everything from, as I said, a Mr. Beer kit all the way up to a nice grandfather, and now my primary brew system, believe it or not, is my BEERMKR, simply because I can experiment with it. I build all my recipes up a 5-gallon, the ones that I create, and then scale them down for BEERMKR and make the tweaks I need to hit the gravity and the style I'm trying to brew. But the nice thing about brewing with BEERMKR is that I'm able to really experiment, and if I make a batch I'm not too happy with on a 5-gallon system, that's a lot of beer to get rid of, and also slows me down, because having to go through 50 or so bottles of beer can be tiresome. With the BEERMKR, I'm able to really just tweak things on the fly, go through it, and once I finally dial that recipe in, if it's something I want to brew a lot of, then I can ramp that up to my grandfather. Do you enter a lot of homebrew competitions? I would say yes. That's kind of one of the reasons I brew. And I definitely brew to drink my beer, but for competitions, that's when I get that validation that what I'm making is of quality and to style. When I started doing brew in a bag on my stovetop, those were my first original recipes. And I actually had a friend come over, he was learning how to brew, and he was like, hey, I like New Belgium's Fat Tire, but I want to taste it hoppier. So I designed a similar clone recipe, as you could say, doing research online, just kind of guesstimating on the ingredients and kick the IBUs enough to add some hops, and it came out really tasty, and definitely was what I was shooting for. And as I always said, that's kind of the bug that bit me, that got me into A, wanting to brew more, but B, brewing specifically to get, to match what my palate's telling me I want to make. And so I entered that beer into the local state fair, and I took best of show. And that was a huge catalyst for me. I also entered it into our local homebrew club Oktoberfest competition, which gets entries from all over the country. And I took a silver in in that category. Actually was beat out by a brown ale. But you know, again, it was like, hey, I can actually do this. I can design you know, recipes and then get to the point of, you know, being able to enter them. And I'm not saying every beer I've ever produced is great. Trust me, I've produced some pretty bad ones in the past too, and I haven't done well in competition. But that validation of, hey, I think this is a really good beer, let me try to put it in there in the competition. On side note, I actually judge competitions now too. I've been a certified beer judge for quite a few years now. I want to say 2015 is when I got my certification. And I've learned from the best. My one of the guys who actually proctored my test and did my my training for the beer judge program is actually the new president of the BJCP, and he's a grandmaster judge, highest ranked judge in Arizona. Just a phenomenal resource to have, and in fact, he lives up the road from me. Just makes it easy. I can bounce anything off of him, like, how's this taste? So the other question in here is, how have you ever won a medal? Yes, several. As I said, my first competition, I actually did. So I'll check that box, but normally that's not the way it works. I'll be honest with you. I've had several competitions where I haven't won anything. We'll talk more about nationals here down the road, but yeah, my first nationals, I made it through the first round and did not get any further into that. So it's, you know, it's bittersweet sometimes, but you know, just keeps you trying every year and or every competition to get better. You know, and then also reproducing the same beer and over again. That can be a challenge too. You can produce a great beer and then the next time you try to brew it, it just, you know, something changes, whether it's your process, your ingredients, who knows. But you know, you start to learn about off flavors, different processes, you know, everything from basic sanitation to temp control, you know, and just sometimes, you know, things go wrong. I actually had a water issue at my house and didn't know it until I brewed a beer and it tasted horrible and realized I had a puncture in my RO tank. So little things like that, you know, that you learn through a different process actually help diagnose household problems. So yeah, but yeah, definitely have won medals, primarily in my local competitions. Actually, the first competition I think I've ever entered is in Alaska, and I entered a sour beer of all beers and actually took a gold medal in that competition as well. I made it through Best of Show, but I don't think I won that just because it was a hard beer to reproduce and they didn't want to have to rebrew it. So, but definitely was some quality beer in that category, or in that competition as well. So what brewing competition did I enter? This is definitely nationals. This is the big one. I've been trying for years to win this competition. I think 2015 was my first entry into this, back when they had the homebrew con out in San Diego, and I wanted to judge that competition, but also wanted to enter since we were going to go visit live. And this, I always tell people, this isn't the competition for feedback. This is the competition to win. And I know it's not always about winning, but this competition is. It's like they give 1% of the entries medals. So just to be able to get a bronze medal, you know, in a competition like this is something to be honored. I've gotten close. Actually, the first time I entered, I actually made through the first round, and I actually got a second place ribbon for that. They don't do medals in the first round, but they definitely, you know, you basically have to rebrew your beer unless it's a beer that that holds well, and you know, for a few months between the first round. First round usually happens March, April, and then they normally judge at the actual conference in June. And that particular beer was an ESB that I was very proud of. And I already kind of mentioned this earlier, but you know, sometimes you don't reproduce the same beer you made originally, and that, in my case, that was it. And I know this beer had a really good window between 6 to 10 weeks, and so definitely I could not enter the same beer twice with several months apart, but unfortunately I just was not happy with the other results. I actually entered my previous beer that I brewed, and it just fell off and didn't do well. And that, you know, again, live and learn, right? So you know, another big plug for BEERMKR here. You know, the fact that if I had the ability to brew smaller batches, I could have rebrewed several of these with the space and at different times, and entered the one I like the best. And but brewing 5-gallon batches and having limited keg space and not wanting to just dump beer. I mean, the beer I'm producing is good. It could be better. You know, so I'm not wanting to dump it. With BEERMKR, it gives me the ability to, you know, brew these 1-gallon ish batches, and and really dive into when my beer is aged perfectly and which beer to submit. The category, what category and why? Well, it's a porter, and I designed a porter. That's a great question, though, because the one thing I learned judging is that you should always enter the beer you made, not the beer category you were targeting. And with a porter, you don't have a lot of flexibility there. It pretty much is, unless maybe you made it robust and now it's a stout, but for the most part, you're going to enter a porter in a porter category. But I've had, let's take a pale ale. Sometimes you make it extra hoppy. Maybe it's an IPA now, or vice versa. You make an IPA that's just not hoppy enough. It's a pale ale. That's the great thing about being part of a homebrew club and having the ability to have other people try your beers, especially if they have certified judges in their, in the club, which most clubs do. Just bring your beer and let them try it. Say, what category should I enter this in? And again, you may have designed a beer that's one way and it tastes, completely different. If you want to do well in competitions, enter the beer as it is, not the beer style you were trying to go for. But in my case, yeah, definitely was a porter, and through. Little story behind that is that I modeled this after Founders Porter. I honestly think, in my opinion, it's the best porter that I've ever had. I kind of mentioned earlier with the New Belgium Fat Tire, I like to start with somebody else's recipe and see if I can clone it or change it if I want to change it. But really, I like to be able to do side-by-sides, because that, if you can take world-class breweries and make their product very similar in your home, then you're doing something right. And that's what I did with this. I modeled my recipe after Founders, and that's not a recipe that's readily available online. I did a lot of research. I did see an email from from the head brewer at Founders, and he gave some tweaks and things to try, but there was still a lot of gray area to fill in, and I just kept brewing and brewing. I brewed it multiple times until I got what I felt was close. And as a flagship, porter from a category standpoint, I was very happy with what I produced. And then what type of beer were you shooting for? So yeah, I was shooting for a porter that closely matched Founders. And I think I nailed it. I mean, and apparently, I've done well with it, and it definitely is, a beer I'm very proud of. Why did you choose to use BEERMKR versus another system? Really, it comes down to the fact that I wanted to brew it over and over again if I had to, and I didn't want to have to dump a bunch of beer if I didn't come out right. Made something that just, was Frankenstein's monster. I didn't want to have to get to the point of dumping that. Or the fact is, even if I produced a great beer, if it's just not what I'm targeting, again, there's not a lot. I don't have a ton of space. I've got like 7 kegs, and granted, I could bottle. There's a reason I keg. I hate bottling, and it's backbreaking work. It takes a couple hours. Just not what I want to do. And I'm a big fan of forced carbonation, and just easier. I think it produces cleaner beers. Some people are really good with it. I wasn't with the with the natural carbonation, and kegging opened up my world to brewing and enjoying brewing again. And so, with that said, though, again, 5-gallon batches can, that's a lot of beer to get rid of. Even if it's great beer, I might brew the same recipe 5 times. That's 25 gallons of beer, and I don't want to only have porter on tap. So it's, being able to have, a case of beer ready to go makes it, so much easier to just experiment. And I actually did a smash recipe for our homebrew club, single malt, single hop, and they gave, we had a certain amount of ingredients we could get, and it was pretty much designed for a 1 5-gallon batch. I was able to turn those ingredients into 3 different batches, and I played around with yeast. I played around with toasting a portion of the grain, and just to see if I could get different colors and stuff too. And as I said, I was able to do 3 batches with it, and then we did a little competition. I did not win this competition, but it's a malt I'm not familiar with. That's why. But it was fun to be able to experiment and play and taste the different yeast profiles and the different treatments of the grain that I did, which I wouldn't have, I would only have one shot with a 5-gallon batch. So really that's why I chose BEERMKR. Another reason too is that whenever I'm doing off category beers, maybe it's something I don't drink a whole ton of, but I want to learn how to brew, I'd much rather do a smaller batch. And then finally, once I find that in this case, my porter recipe, once I have that is, as I said, I build all my recipes in 5-gallon grainfather batches, and then scale them down. But in this case, that beer will go into rotation at my house, and I will probably always have this porter on tap in a 5-gallon batch. So I think it's nice that they complement each other, and you have the ability to, play around. All right, so for the big question, did you win a medal? Heck yeah, I won a medal. I won a gold medal. I won a gold medal. I was going to be happy with a bronze. I have been trying, for 6 years now to win a medal in this competition, and it has eluded me so many times. Bridesmaid, never a bride in this competition. Last year I entered some really quality beers, and unfortunately COVID canceled the entire competition. So I just decided I'm gonna try again. I'm gonna produce even better beer, hopefully, and win that. And unfortunately, I was actually in my car when they did the live stream. I was on my way to our clubhouse for our homebrew club, and I had actually got distracted trying to leave somewhere, and I didn't get there in time. And all of a sudden, my phone started blowing up, and I look at it, don't do this while you're driving, but I look at it, actually missed my exit because I was like, what is going on? Why is my phone blowing up? And fortunately, I was able to go in and look at the live stream after the fact, but I was in shock. I mean, 1% of the people who enter get a medal. There was 165 people in my category, and which is not top 5, I think, of the amount, but it's pretty dang close, at least top 10 for the 40 or something different categories that they have. So to not only win a medal, but get gold, as I said, I was still in awe. It took a while for that cloud over my head to kind of dissipate, because it's like I couldn't believe it was surreal. As I said, it's something I didn't envision. I just wanted a medal, and that's what it was. I didn't care what color it was, but winning gold was pretty nice. So anyway. Did you build off an existing maker kit, or did you start from scratch? This one I started from scratch. I did actually put about 5 kits through my BEERMKR before I started creating my own recipe. I tweaked a couple too, but for the most part, I wanted to get an idea of how the process was, what quality of beer, what the efficiency was like, which anybody wondering, BEERMKR's efficiency is insane. It's 80+%, which is right where my grandfather is. And I think that was probably my biggest hesitation, and I don't want to talk about other products here that maybe that I never jumped into, but a couple of the other previous systems I've seen were around 50%, and that's just a lot of ingredients to waste. So having an 80% efficiency on BEERMKR is huge, because I build most of my recipes right around that anyway, so there's not a lot of conversion I have to do between my two systems. The thing about building recipes for me is I'm very, I think the start from scratch is a little too narrow for me, because I'm not great at that. I can't take a blank canvas and do a complete landscape picture. I'd rather have somebody else start with some stick figures or something and put it out there, whatever, and then I'll start like, oh yeah, that looks good there, it looks good. That's kind of how I build my ingredients. So I do a lot of research online. I look at other people who have tried. In this case, with Founders, it wasn't a huge amount of information, but a couple of the older homebrew forums had some details, and there was even some disagreement there too. The difference being that, maybe the base malt's a little different, or the type of hops they use, or what they had available at the time too, and then everything down to the yeast. So you do a lot of, again, trial and error, and at a 1-gallon batch, it's very easy to go in and tweak little things here and there. And I think my biggest 2 things that I had to decide on were what's the base malt, and also what type of yeast to use. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a big dry yeast person. I've used liquid yeast, built up starters. I have a stir plate and an Erlen fire flask and all that. But I'm also can be lazy sometimes, and I don't have time to build up a starter. So I'll grab a dry yeast. And fortunately, over the years, they have a ton of new strains that have allowed us to target, particular styles, and I've been happy with it. Again, nothing against White Labs or White Yeast or any of them, but I'm a fermentist type person, and I will go ahead and use dry yeast whenever I can, unless it's just something I can't find and I need to go to liquid. Would you be willing to share the recipe? Yes, I actually have to. It's part of the agreement when I enter nationals. My recipe is a 5-gallon batch will be published in Zermargi magazine, probably the next one they release. I actually submitted that last week. But I will also happy to scale it down for our BEERMKR folks and allow somebody to build it the 1.3 gallon batch as well too, which is what I had to do, right? Can you walk us through the ingredients step by step and why I chose these ingredients? Yes, definitely. As I mentioned before, I did a lot of research online and kind of looked at different recipes, and there seemed to be 3 main base ingredients, and one being traditional 2-row Pilsen, which that one I wasn't too sold on, and then Maris Otter. And I'd be honest with you, I just got lucky with the Maris Otter. It was kind of where I targeted. I like the profile Maris Otter. It's got a little shortbread action to it, and I've always been really happy with that grain. I've built a couple recipes off Maris Otter, so that was kind of my first foray into it, and it hit the profile I was going for, the flavors, and I was happy. So I didn't change that. I got lucky the first time through. Hops were a question as well too, but let's go ahead and go through the actual, and I've got my handy dandy recipe list here. Unfortunately, I don't remember all of them at once. So we've got a little bit of chocolate malt. It's a porter, so you want a little chocolate flavor in there too. Munich, again, just kind of going for a little sweetness, a little breadiness, and just a complement there with the Maris Otter. Carapils, dextrin, head retention, really. I kind of put in, a small amount of that in most of my beers anyway, anything I design, just really for that body fullness and the head retention, so it looks pretty coming out of being poured. You want a little color, so Crystal 120 in there as well, and then Black Patent, gotta have the coffee. I actually have a love-hate relationship with Black Patent. Sometimes it's a little too coffee for me, so I'll maybe go to a debittered. But again, trying to hit that style for a porter, you really got to get to the point of having those coffee and a little bit of burnt flavor, best way I can describe it. Not in a bad way, but think about it of a char and a steak, right? That kind of flavor you want to come through on, and I'll be honest with you, a couple of these were shared with me in that forum, and I didn't really tweak too much with it. Ratios or percentages were somewhat of a guess, but again, I'm looking at my ingredients here. 73% of this was Maris Otter, 9% chocolate malt, 8% Munich, 5% Carapils dextrin, which is pretty typical for most of my recipes, and then a small amount, 4% Crystal, and then less than 2% Black Patent. So when it came to hops, I did use the email that I saw from the brewer at Founders. I stuck with Nugget, Crystal, and Willamette for your Nugget being the bittering hop, and then Crystal and Willamette for the flavor hops, and then for aroma, more Crystal and Willamette. So there was, I think, I'm trying to remember what the other one they were using instead of Nugget, Hallertau or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head, to be honest with you. But basically, I stuck with what was presented there. He had a pretty good idea as far as where to put them. And again, it was something I kind of hit the first time through, and I didn't really have to change it. I was hitting the IBUs I wanted, the flavors. With this design, I want to say probably the one thing I changed going back to the black patent, is that I did try a debittered first time through, and it just wasn't giving me the roastiness that I wanted. And then I altered the crystal a little bit too. I think I started with, where are we at? 3.8, probably closer to 10%, which I think was a little heavy. But again, it was these ratios I found online that I tweaked and used as a guide to really hone in the recipe. This recipe I brewed 3 times. So just to kind of give you an idea of what ended up going to nationals. So it was minor tweaks here and there. Anybody who's done a smash recipe understands that you don't change too much. You kind of stick with the same style and tweak one thing at a time. It's really what I did here. So first time I tweaked the debitter to the black patent, and the next time I toned down the crystal a little bit. But other than that, it is that is pretty much the same recipe I started with some minor tweaks. And as far as the yeast, I'm a big fan of USO5, American Ale yeast. Usually, majority of my recipes will be built on that or SO4, depending on the style I'm going for. I talked about my ESB earlier. I do make that one off of a London yeast, and that's just something that I played around with, kind of did a alternate version there. But really, my go-to on most recipes will start with the USO5, unless it's a specific style. If I'm going to do a Kolsch or something, I'm definitely going with something that's more Kolschy. I make a 1554 a New Belgian beer that actually use a lager S23 yeast at ale temperatures, which I like. It's almost like a steam beer. But with this particular recipe, this one thrived on USO5, and I didn't see a reason to change it. Question is, did I run a specific MKRKIT program, or did I make my own? I actually designed my own. Makes it real easy. Primarily, I just wanted to control some of the fermentation characteristics, and then really get down to the point where I crash. One thing I do a little differently, I know some people will go straight from brewing to beer tap. I actually will take my bag and throw it in my fridge and just let it condition at fridge temps, right around 35-ish degrees Fahrenheit, and just to let it mellow a little bit. A beer like this, a porter, you're not going to want to drink out of the gate right away anyway, so no hurry. And then from there, I actually put it in the MKRKIT and carved it up, with the standard portable CO2 cartridges, and really I've had great success with the carbonation preset for a beer maker. And I know a lot of people will tweak their recipes for carbonation, especially people like who force carb. I really don't. Most of mine are somewhere between 10 and 12 psi. So that's pretty typical. There's not a lot of variation from a palate. I'm sure I'm going to get beat up by my BJCP judges, but seriously, I think the one thing that we see more of is that people will be undercarbed, and that really changes the beer profile. And while a porter and maybe even a stout is a lower PSI, from a mouthfeel standpoint, right around where they, 10 to 12 PSI is really a good sweet spot for most beers out there. But yeah, as far as the MKRKIT, I use the DIY. I'm looking at my things here. So really targeted a primary fermentation of 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and carried that for the most part through. I mean, BEERMKR doesn't boil too much, so it's at all actually. So there's not a lot of control there, which I love, because I honestly think it's a more controlled, mash, as you can say, because it's constantly moving and really giving you, getting the conversion and those sugars off the grains. But yeah, my target is 155 normally on a mash. But with BEERMKR, I just kind of let it do its thing at that point, and then control the fermentation at the end there. Did you change anything about the normal process of this beer? Just as I mentioned previously, kind of let the BEERMKR do its work when it came to no boil, right? Just because of the fact that that doesn't do that. So yeah, that's a little bit different than I would do with my grandfather. And then, as I said, I condition, the bag in the fridge before I move it into the beer tap. But that's pretty typical of what I would do with the grandfather as well too. I tend to cold crash on everything. On beers that I want a little more clarity out of, I'll throw in some gelatin as well towards the end during the cold crash and let it sit for a few days. But a porter does not have to be clear, so didn't need to do that this time around. Some people do Irish moss as well too. Again, not something that I needed to do with this. I'm a big fan of gelatin. Like on my ESB recipe, I use that to clear it up. But for the most part, really between my 5-gallon brew system and my BEERMKR, I don't change a whole bunch, other than scaling the recipe down. I do want to comment one thing. I actually only use half a packet of yeast, and I actually think that's plenty. So that's one thing I do. I do split my yeast packets, just because of the fact that yeast is money, and I'm able to split those up. And I would probably do the same thing with liquid yeast, and I would probably build one up and only use a partial starter. But in this case, I didn't have to do that. I used half a pack of USO5, threw it in there, and it went off like wildfire. So definitely a very typical process outside of the hour of cleaning I normally have to do. All right, so how did it taste? I mean, definitely tasted what I was looking for, but to be a little more specific, I would say, it's robust, but still sweet. I think that's the biggest difference between a porter and a stout. A stout is a little drier, definitely a little more burn, not hot burn, but actual roast burn. And I also find stouts to be a little hot beer. This is more in the middle. Sweet, slight hot presence, but definitely there. But you're really focused on the core of the beer and going across your palate. And that's that malt sweetness with the coffee and the chocolate. Just blends really nicely. And I'm a big porter fan. I know stouts get a lot of the attention these days, especially because people are putting the most crazy ingredients in them, which is good, because if you're gonna throw cereal in a Frosted Flakes or Trix or whatever people put in it, you definitely want to have something that's definitely a little harsher. With a porter, I want it to be clean. I want it to, I view it like a pale ale for an IPA. It's like, I don't want it to be extremely one way or the other, hoppy or harsh, I want it right in the middle. And I guess best way I can describe it is like eating a candy bar, but not dark chocolate, not milk chocolate, and which is, by the way, which I highly recommend pairing with this, is something like that, something with a little bit of robust chocolate or even a cookie or something like that, just to give you that nice complement and really bring those flavors out. It was what I was looking for, and it really reminded me of the first time I had a Founder's Porter. I'd had porters in the past, but nothing really stood out. The first time I had one, it really stood out. That's what this beer reminded me of entirely.